Hello again. I spoke the other day about my bewilderment at seeing the expression far right cropping up over and over again in the news media, with no sign of any actual far right activity in the real world in Britain. It almost looks as though the phrase is being trotted out so often in an attempt to persuade gullible folk that there is a serious threat from neo-Nazis or fascists. Somebody sent me a link to a Google Ngram search, and this made everything clear. For those of you who don't know what it is, Ngram is a search engine which can track the frequency with which a word or phrase appears in print, going back a couple of centuries. It can then present this information in the form of a graph. Doing this with the phrase far right shows us at a glance what is actually going on and why we are seeing so many references to the far right lately. In the description to this video, I give a link to the Ngram viewer, which displays the graph for the words far right when used together. And what an interesting picture we do see. The phrase was used in a small way during the Second World War, which comes as little or no surprise because, of course, at that time there really was a far right, people like Hitler and Mussolini and their followers. During the early 1950s, the phrase declined in use, but then from 1957 to 1964, its use soars again, until it's being bandied about far more than it was during the war when the Nazis and various fascist movements were active. Why on earth should this be? Well, those were the years when a Conservative government was in power. Remember Mr. Macmillan and Alec Douglas-Home? There was very little far-right activity in Britain at that time, but there was certainly a Tory administration. Once Harold Wilson was elected in 1964, use of the term dropped back again, and then it picked up when Ted Heath came to power. It was used a lot when Margaret Thatcher was at the height of her powers, and then fell out of use again. When John Major took over, we see that the use of far right suddenly rises sharply, right up until the point when Tony Blair was elected in 1997. Then people stopped using it so much. When David Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010, we see far right becoming a very popular concept again, and it's now soared to record levels. In other words, the use of the phrase has absolutely no relation to anything happening in the objective world. It is simply used when the Tories are in power, and the longer they are in power, the more often the expression appears in print. It's really no more than a left-wing catchphrase, which is used as a criticism and reproach to Conservative governments when they've been in power for a few years. This makes everything much clearer because those of us who view Britain objectively do not see any evidence of far-right movements or activity, and so have been puzzled as to why we are hearing so much about it in this way. The answer is simply that the Tories have been in power since 2010, and that as soon as Labour comes to power in a matter of months now, the use of the expression will plummet, and we shan't be reading about the far right every time we open our daily newspapers as we are currently.